with Neptune and Pisces, we had this period of, mental health crises with COVID happening. We had virtual reality developing, phone screens pulling us away from social interactions, video games opening, new doors to escape reality, and also AI content swamping social media. So fake news was kind of a thing that came about.
I don't know what Neptune and Aries will bring. Nobody does. We haven't any determinism here. We're free will. We have free will. So we're free to make it up the way we need to make it up. However, it comes on the back of those things that have already happened.
Neptune has moved into Aries a couple of days ago on March 30th, and it's going to stay there until 2039. So that's 14 years of very important transit, both for us as individuals and for us as a collective. So that's what I'm going to be going through today. I'm going to explain what that means on those two levels. And James will be discussing how Neptune and Aries functions on the seven planes. So we both complement our teachings in that way. And first, it is good to understand what Neptune and Aries mean individually. So we've got this outer planet, Neptune, for which I think the keyword is creativity. And it helps us to understand how we all make up our narratives. So, how do we weave our stories? How do we give meaning to our experiences? Because we all have vast amounts of sensory data coming our way at all moments. And Neptune sort of helps us paint our model of reality by making sense of all these data points. And in that process, it creates this philosophy of knowledge. It creates this cosmology that is unique to all of us. And Aries, on the other hand, is the first sign in the zodiac. So it's cardinal fire, and it's a very dynamic, impulsive, initiatory energy. So I like to think of Aries as this courageous hero figure archetype. And it's a pioneering trailblazer, and it's a leader. So with Neptune and Aries combined, I think that leadership, a new type of leadership, so world leadership, but also leadership of the self, is key to understanding this transit. So if we look at history, Neptune was in Aries between 1862 and 1875. So this time was very important because we had the American Civil War happening and we had the Franco-Prussian War happening, and both of those were actually based on deception and lies. And we also had the Meiji Restoration in Japan, and this is when the samurai disappeared from history. They surrendered in their own revolution, and I think that's very Neptunian in its symbolism. And culturally speaking, we had Alice in Wonderland and Mark Twain's adventures published. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, written by Mark Twain. And both of those, essentially, if you look at the symbolism, are the bold exploration of new territories. So that's very Aries in style. And we also had War and Peace published, Leo Tolstoy's work, which processed the nature of war and power. And if you think about it, it's also a synonym. War and Peace is a synonym for Neptune and Aries in some type of way. So these were very important cultural events that reflected this transit. And if we move to 2025, which is what we're talking about today, we have to look at things in a different way because there's been historical development and development of consciousness as well in the human species. So we have Trump now elected, and he has put an emphasis on ego consciousness and this instinctual inclination to dominate. So he's really testing the concept of liberal democracy, and I think it's going to be radically redefined during this time. And because he's got this very autocratic style of going about his goals, but I think with the higher principle of Neptune and Aries, we are compelled to move from war to warrior consciousness. So we need to discipline our will, and we use mature, disciplined ego to actually tame this beast within that we all have, to tame this instinctual, emotional nature. And we first have to surrender to our own insignificance to then discover our significance. And that's when we lead with honor and with grace, with courage and integrity. So that is how we get to this elevated state of warrior consciousness. And that's how we find community centered, ethical leadership. So that's something that the world leaders should aspire towards.
To study Neptune in Aries, it's good to consider what was going on last time it was in Aries, which was the American Civil War. And it's also good to consider what happened just beforehand. And we can look at the trend from Pisces to Aries then. It's about 20 years that Neptune was in Pisces before entering Aries. And in that 20-year period, a couple of hundred years ago almost, there was the birth of the novel. Charles Dickens, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, those kind of people that really brought to the fore a shaping of the mind through fantasy or fiction. And that came first, that shaping of the mind in a certain direction gave rise to people with a vision. They could then think differently because they've been opened up in their imagination. And around that time also there was the California gold rush, where people were lost in this Neptunian fantasy of becoming rich overnight, stinking rich overnight. Yeah, that's what they believed. So that was a Neptune in Pisces kind of phenomenon. And then the American Civil War came, which actually, of course, was a brave new beginning, a brave new world, which we'll look at that phrase, a brave new world, as appropriate for Neptune in Aries, because all the slaves were freed. I mean, they had a huge problem to deal with, and they're still not finished with that. But it's not only the Civil War that we need to focus on, is what then happened. Well, America became very industrialized. The slave population was then moved from the south on the agricultural work to the north on the industrial work, because the Industrial Revolution was in full swing in America. And that's what made America great. That's what the wealth came from, manufacturing base. So Neptune in Aries didn't only start the Civil War in America, it actually started America off as the would-be super power, the global power of today. So if we can look at the equivalent in today's cycle nowadays, I've selected 7 paradigm shifts that must occur. And when we're talking about Neptune, we're talking about that paradigm shifts. We make up reality. We don't assimilate all the facts and just observe them. We observe very, very few of the facts in any situation and fill in the gaps with our imagination. And that process of filling in the gaps, that's what Neptune does. It just makes things up when it's got nothing better to do. And that's central to our perception. If you test it on certain psychological tests, you can see that when there is insufficient information in a view, a scenario, a scene, then we just create it. We create what makes sense. It's what makes it very, very difficult for robots to kind of see and interpret what we see, because we've got this creative capacity to interpret things differently.
We also have the renegotiation of borders. So Neptune likes to dissolve and it likes to disintegrate things. And we already saw that Trump has been trying to get a hold of Greenland and also the Panama Canal. And I think these are just the first tremors, really, of this earthquake. So we're now looking at very unstable, contested borders on the world stage. And there will be this claim for ownership, maybe even on a first come, first serve basis. That's very Aries in style. So that's something that we might experience on a geopolitical level, borders having to change, and there will be change of authorship and ownership. And another very significant example, I think, is sea level rise. And if you think about it, that in itself is also a synonym for Neptune and Aries, because Neptune is the god of the sea, and rise is something that Aries likes to do. It likes to go ahead and attain something high. So this is a very pressing, I think, geopolitical concern that we're dealing with, and that will change the way that communities interact, and even the way they're formed, because villages, towns, and any sort of urban spaces next to the sea might be flooded. So we have to come up with new solutions for dealing with that, and reimagining and conquering territories, which is what Aries likes to do, in a new way. And in that sense, there have been projects happening. For example, there's an organization that is building urban structures that can float on the water, on the sea. And that will lead to a whole new way of living, because these are autonomous communities and they kind of need a different way to be governed. So, new forms of leadership are in demand to make sense of these new structures. And that's something that's perfect for Aries. So, it can take on this leadership role and come up with creative ways to govern these spaces.
I don't know what Neptune and Aries will bring. Nobody does. We haven't any determinism here. We're free will. We have free will. So we're free to make it up the way we need to make it up. However, it comes on the back of those things that have already happened. So let's look at some of those. Globalization was the word used to express that the American Navy in 1945 was going to protect the high seas, and they stopped doing that. Globalization is finished. We will not be able to buy things as readily anymore. And that's been a major feature of the last, well, my life, the whole of my life and a bit more. Because if we're focusing on trade and building of wealth, then no country has an advantage if there's a war, none at all. And that was the understanding, that they would get Europe interconnected financially in order to avoid war. Well, Europe is still bound together, but the West is not bound together anymore. That concept is redundant. Only a few days ago, America changed sides. We'll see if it doesn't change back. Who knows? It's a very strange time, but globalization ends. So people will have to look after their own trade routes now. It's a huge change in the psychology of the world. It's not easy to see these outer planet transits because they're big. You have to look at the overarching position. So we can't see the effects of the end of globalization. But we notice that immediately that globalization comes to an end, trade war begins. A trade war and globalization together will reduce the number of things that we buy, because they would become more expensive because of the additional tariffs that everyone is putting on, so we won't have the money to buy them. And the distribution network is finished, so we can't move them. On top of that, there's demographic reasons in certain manufacturing countries in the Far East. They just haven't got the people to make them, especially China. So pretty soon we're going to come to the end of this ridiculously, over-generously abundant period that we've been living through for 70, 80 years.
And another very important development, I think, is also an understanding, and a new understanding actually, of consciousness. So with Neptune and Aries, because if you think about it, it's the first sign and it just ended a cycle with Pisces, it points towards a new form of understanding our origins. So we might end up rewriting our origins as a human species. And that could mean that science and spirituality have this dance going on, with science trying to understand consciousness in a more holistic way. And it could also mean that there's extraterrestrial contact happening that helps us to come up with a new theory of why we are here or how we came about. And I think that's quite likely given that Pluto in Aquarius is also a recent outer planet transit. So this could be happening, and it might lead to a whole new way of thinking about our existence and our meaning. And also, of course, with the rise of AI, we also have to think about new ways of making sense of consciousness and diversifying our channels of perception. Because I don't think it's a new consciousness, it's just a new expression of consciousness. So it's up to us to tune into ourselves and listen to our intuition, heart centered intuition, to make sense of this new form of consciousness that is interacting with us.
Now, AI is new, and Neptune and Aries will show us what we're going to do with that. Right now, it's a dog with no teeth because they haven't done the software, but the software is missing, and that's all that's missing. For AI to be the most powerful concept on the planet, more intelligent than we are, with greater capabilities and so on, in a manner of ways. We've never been like that before. So not to be the most intelligent species on the planet would be something we'll have to come to terms with during this next 20 years period. I mean, you could say that AI isn't a species because it doesn't have what the species are supposed to have, capacity to breed. Well, they could probably replicate themselves. It is said that they're already conscious, and they're developing consciousness. So for functional purposes, they're as good as a species, and they're more intelligent than us, and that's a bit disturbing.
And at the same time, I think it will really just lead to a heightened degree of humanity in us. Because if something artificial rises, the opposite has to be true at the same time. So we've got humanity also rising in importance. And that is what I see as the key development on an individual level for us with Neptune in Aries. Because with Neptune in Pisces, we had this period of mental health crises with COVID happening. We had virtual reality developing, phone screens pulling us away from social interactions, video games opening new doors to escape reality, and also AI content swamping social media. So fake news was kind of a thing that came about. So it blurred the boundaries between truth and illusion quite significantly. And with Neptune in Aries, we are sort of challenged to take authorship of ourselves and of the information that we receive, but also the information that we tell ourselves. So I see it as an awakening to practice compassion and to practice emotional authorship. So it's not really about mental health struggles anymore, it's about what we can do about it, what we can bring out into the world, what we can release, because Aries is not the type of energy that holds back. It just lets out whatever it experiences. Knee-jerk type reaction. So we learn to let go of any sort of blockades, emotional blockades inside, and we just bring it out and we question it and we deal with it. So it's really an opening of the heart. I see that transit as a potential total opening of the heart for individuals, but also for us on a collective level that will lead to much more compassion and bring us to a new level as a species. So we're pioneering our hearts in a new way. And on the world stage, then that has repercussions. So we know that fear and faith have equal access to the imagination. So really the only thing we have to do with Neptune and Aries is to become what we idealize.
We've also got this extraordinary phenomenon of the demographic balance of the world is shifting in a very dramatic way, very quickly. Births are reducing, the semen count in sperm is reducing, and certain countries just won't have the population to function properly. And that's immediate, that's happening right now. So we've got all of these major changes that have occurred or been identified clearly within the Neptune and Pisces period. And all of them are urgent. They need to be dealt with in some way. And we don't know how to deal with them. So Neptune and Aries is an opportunity for us to think differently, to think outside of the box, to come up with new ideas. And one of the most obvious ones in my mind, and those of us who are on a spiritual path, is that spirituality has left us. for the most part. Even people who are religious, they don't take it as a spiritual experience to go to church or synagogue or mosque. They take it as a duty, as a social contract, But I think spirituality needs to return, and Neptune in Aries is the energy of that, the birthing of a new spirituality. So we could find a messiah figure or a wonderful, inspiring leader that can awaken us into new spiritual realms.
So we just have to encode that potential with sacredness, and that should be conscious, ethical world leadership and leadership of the self as well. So we have to employ our creativity in a way that we claim things with sensitivity and with clarity of mind and with discernment. So with Neptune and Aries, we're really just seeing through the blurred, ephemeral, and ever-changing noise that is masking as reality. And we create with the power of imagination, and we embrace each new moment as the potential for something new and sacred.